your strength back. Sit down, let's eat. And he doesn't stop there. He goes ahead and says, God, thank you for this food. He begins to eat. He doesn't wait on the other people to eat. Some of us want to encourage people to do something, and then when they don't want to do it, then we want to stop. Paul said, I'm going to eat. And I've encouraged you. If you eat, cool. If you don't, I guess I'll survive. And he eats the food, so he gets all of them in to eat the food as well. And then they get into some real turmoil and stuff started flying off the boat. All this stuff is going on. And it gets to the point where they just think about jumping overboard. Paul says, no. It gets to the point where one of the men suggests, let's kill all the prisoners so they won't escape. And again, the enemy says no. Because I need Paul to make it. I need Paul to live. So again, he receives the favor of God. And so all these things are happening. And so now they're close enough to this land. And he says, the ones that can swim, go ahead and jump off. He says, the ones that can't, he says, it's okay. He says, we got the pieces of the boat. And at the very end, it said, every last one of them made it. It says, the rest were together on planks or other pieces of the ship. In this way, everyone reached land safely. Had they abandoned the ship, before it had got the worst of the worst, they wouldn't have made it. But because they endured the worst of the worst, they made it. Because they endured the worst of the worst of the worst, they made it. They didn't arrive the way they came. They didn't arrive on this big grand ship. They came on little bitty pieces. But I remember in the Bible that you have faith the size of a mustard seed. It don't even have to be big that you can move mountains. So if I'm on this little plane, there's enough support to get me where I'm going. It's enough. And so I just want to give y'all some points and I'm done. Number one, you have to refuse to die. You have to refuse to die. Paul never quit claiming his innocence or right to stand trial. He got out every single time he was hit. He told him, if I'm guilty, then death. Okay, death is there. But if I'm not, he said, I refuse. I'm not dying at their hands. I'm not dying at your hands. If I've done anything wrong, death is there. But I know I'm living right, so I refuse. This is something I've learned. Even babies, when they're real little, learn to refuse. Yet some of us can't. You give a little baby some mashed peas, and they don't want them. You try to open their mouth, it's not going to work. They're going to turn their head. And just suppose you are able to get the little airplane in their mouth, they don't. When a baby refuses to do something, he may not can talk and communicate his needs, but he is going to refuse to eat that stuff to the point you're going to have to make him something else. So it's something that we're given from the time we were born. We learn how to refuse. The problem is we don't use it. And so I want to talk about two people real quick. We have Rosa Parks. Everybody know about Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks did something very big by refusing. She was the major spark of the American Civil Rights Movement. In December 1st, 1955, the bus driver demanded she give up her seat. She refused. That's all it says. He said, hey, give your seat up to somebody else to sit down. She said, I refuse. She wasn't trying to do anything special that morning. She knew the routine. She even knew the consequences. Matter of fact, it says earlier she had helped another individual out that was going to court because they refused to give her seat up. It wasn't nothing special about her. But this particular day, she said, you know what? I rode this bus long enough. I got up, give my seat up long enough. As a little girl, I watched other people ride on the bus while I had to walk. I sat there and see myself be segregated and separated because of my skin. And on this day, I refused. My feet are hurting. I've worked he stood on God's promises. In the Bible, Abraham was told to kill his firstborn. Abraham didn't want to kill his son. He had prayed for his son and waited for his son forever. But he took his son up the hill. He was getting ready, and God said, there's a ram. It wasn't until he got to the worst of the worst of the worst. God didn't stop him when they made it up the hill. God didn't stop him when he put his son up. God didn't stop him when he wrapped him up. And God only stopped him when it was the worst of the worst. He didn't release the ram until it was the worst of the worst. Number 3. Don't quit when you lose your support. The men were terrified because the boat was breaking, but Paul encouraged them that they would make it without support. The ship was supposed to take them from one place to another. The ship was what supported them on the water so they would not drown. It was the ship that had everything that they needed to survive. It had places for them to sleep, places for them to use. It was the ship. And so the men panicked when their support was breaking. But Paul encouraged them they were going to make it. It didn't matter. They were going to make it. They didn't have to have support. They were going to make it. I don't know about you, but when I first started my ministry, the first day I preached, next Sunday would be my anniversary of me starting my first sermon. And I remember I was excited, I was happy, I was going through a lot of stuff with my family, I was going through a lot of stuff with church. I was just going through a lot, and it was time for me to do my first sermon. And I remember I took the stage, and I began to preach my message. And I didn't have any support. There were some family members that didn't show for my very first sermon. They had made all these roles for me. And it said all my family names on it. Nobody showed. I looked over there and it got to the point where I told them, we're just making school people up. It's embarrassing. Take a couple of those papers off. Not only that, I remember that some of the things I was in the church with, they had alts with me. And so I had people that were sitting there looking at me crazy. And I stood there and I said, you know what? I didn't come for you. I didn't come for them. But I came to deliver the word of God. And I'm not scared because I'm not afraid of the shame of the gospel. And I don't even know how I'm doing this. I know I'm not fit. I know I don't have what it takes. But I have no other choice but to preach the word of God with or without your support. If you support me, I love it. If you don't, it's okay. God is my support. God is my strength. God is my hope. God is my salvation. And so I had to preach the message without any help. T.D. Jakes preached a sermon one time. He said that there was a woman who had a baby, and the midwife did not make it in time. And so because she had to push by herself, she pushed the baby out. When she pushed the baby out, the afterbirth came with it. The afterbirth was what the baby needed while it was in this world. But when the baby came out, it no longer needed the afterbirth. But because she had no support, because she had no midwife there to just cut some things off and to detach some things and to help her, she had to go into it by herself. How many of you lost the support of your family and your friends when you decided to walk this road for Christ? How many of you, when you told people, hey, I'm going to preach my first sermon, I'm going to be a greeter, I'm going to serve on the deacon board, when you told them, how many people laughed at you and said, there's no way? How many of you didn't have the support, didn't have that person to hold your hand to help you understand and to articulate things for you so you could understand? If you didn't have anybody, let me tell you about Tamar. In the Bible, Tamar was David's daughter by another woman. And he had a son named Amnon. And Amnon lusted after Tamar, his own half-sister, and he loved her. And then he loved her so much he got sick in his body because he wanted her that bad. He threw the relationship out the door, and he talked to a friend who gave him the wrong support and told him if you want to go get her. So he did. He went and got her. And he had his way with her. She was a virgin. That meant everything to her. She wanted a husband one day. She was proud of what she was doing. She was living the way God had told her to live. She hadn't done anything to entice him. But yet he called her, he had his way with her, and when he was done, he sent her away. advantage of. And she was by herself in her brother's home for the rest of her life. But even though I don't know Tamar's story, I can just imagine that Tamar, she lived a good life because Tamar name means survivor. It means palm tree. And I've got to help you. I can just imagine when Tamar was a little girl that she looked up to her mom and she said, Mama, what does my name mean? Because my children ask me all the time, Mama, what does my name mean? Who named me? Why my name this? So I can just ask, Mama, what does my name mean? And her mom was like, oh, palm tree? Why does your name mean palm tree? I can just imagine that Tamar trying to figure it out. I was like, well, palm trees are survivors. I mean, they can make it no matter what. Okay, so I'm a survivor. And she went through life thinking I'm a survivor. I'm going to have a good life. Everything's going to be good. I'm going to get a good husband. Everything's going to be great. I'm going to have this fantastic life. I'm going to worship the Lord for the rest of my life. Everything's going to be great. And then one day it hits. And her brother takes advantage of her. And she realizes, you mean to tell me from the day that I was born, you set me up to be raped? Wait a minute. You mean to tell me what I was going to survive from was rape? You mean to tell me the thing that I was going to be remembered for in the Bible, wherever you saw my name, that I was going to be raped? You mean to tell me that generations were going to preach about me and the rape? Yes, Tamar. But you survived. It said she lived in her brother's house all the rest of her days. Maybe she didn't get a husband. She didn't have children. But she lived. It said others have went through things that have killed them. But if you are able to make it out of something that others have went through and it did not kill you, you are a survivor. So she lived up to her name, even though it hurt like hell. Amen. She lived up to her name because she was a survivor. And my last one, and I'm done, number 4. When you think it's over, go harder. When you think it's over, go harder. Don't stop believing or doing what you've been doing just because you think you're out of it. For those of you who don't know the story, David was a survivor. Saul was a survivor. Paul, he was a survivor his whole life. And even after he got out of the shipwreck, he still went on to live life. He still was in prison. They didn't just let him go. He couldn't just sit there and rejoice and shout and scream because he had been a survivor. He still had to survive. It wasn't over for him. Just because you survived the suicide doesn't mean that it will never present itself again. He had to continue doing what he was doing. He had to keep praying. He had to keep fasting. He had to keep believing. He had to keep preaching the word of God. There are too many of us that stop. We stop. We come to church and we join church because we just found out we got to go to jail. And so I'm coming to church. I'm going to pray. Pastor Ed bless me. We go to every single altar call. And the minute we go stand before court, they say, you know, you can go home. You're like, oh, yeah. Turn up. And we don't see you no more. You know, my marriage is on the rocks. I don't know what I'm going to do. You come to church every day. Pastor, when you going to start your marriage ministry? Pastor, I need this. Pastor. And then all of a sudden your marriage gets better. And we're like, where are you? We didn't went on a date. We didn't went on a honeymoon. We just had to have time for ourselves. Yes. Why do we do that? We need God when we're in the thick of it. And we want God when we're really going through. But then when we get out of it, we no longer, God help me. They just diagnose me with this. I can't make it. I can't take it. God help me. You come before the church, I need you. Help me. Pray. And then they say, you're in remission. And we don't see you. When you think you're done, you have to keep doing what you were doing. Because if Satan came and attacked you once, what makes you think he won't come again and again and again and again? And your message is not done just because you have defeated. Now that you have defeated and you have become a survivor, you now have to be an overcomer. Somebody needs what you went through. They need your story. They need what you've been through. They need what you've gone through. They need to hear your story. Pastor Ed can talk all day. I can talk all day. But there are just some places we haven't been. There are just some things we have not experienced, but you have. And so if I have any survivors, it's time for us to open up our mouth and say something. It's time for us to quit being scared to say what we survived. And it's time for us to quit making excuses. There's 2 types of survivors. There's endurers and there's sacrificers. And endurers is flexible enough to bend but not break. They're the ones that stuff hits them and pastor comes to you and say, I see that you went through this. I saw you on the news. I know everything that's going on. I'm like, Pastor, I'm okay. It hurts, but I'm okay. Yes, oh, yeah, I got hit again, but it's okay. And then there are sacrifices. Sacrifices give up stuff in order to survive the storms of life. That's what a palm tree does. You can tell the storm is coming before it even comes because a palm tree starts to let go of its leaves. To prepare, it lets go of stuff so that it can make it. There are some of you that need to be a sacrificer and let some things go. It's going to hurt, but it's going to help you get through the storm. And if you keep holding on to it, you're going to break. You can't support the weight of the storm and the weight of your own mess at the same time. You've got to release some things, and you've got to let go, and you've got to let God. So I don't know who I'm talking to, but I wish I had some real survivors in the room.